So we all have this kind of pop psychology understanding of psychopathy. We think that usually when we think of the word psychopathy, we think of serial killers, which what this presentation is surrounding, but there are different kinds of psychopathy, and there is a psychological definition of it. So this, by definition, it is a neurosocial disorder identified by a poor control of behavior or impulsivity, lack of empathy and emotional response, repeated social deviance, and antisocial behavior and criminal tendencies. It's assessed via the Hare psychopathy test or the DSM-5, though it's heavily debated on the efficacy of the DSM-5. So the Hare psychopathy test is more sought after to diagnose. And psychopathy is actually very common. It's found in 1.2% of U.S. adult men and around 0.3 to 0.7% of U.S. adult women. And according to a study by Kent Keel, it's twice as common as schizophrenia, anorexia, bipolar disorder, and paranoia, and about as common as bulimia, panic disorder, OCD, and narcissism. So this is very, very eye-opening. And usually with psychopathy, you'll have consistent behavioral symptoms start to show up before the age of 10. And there are two different categories of psychopathy. So you have primary psychopathy, which follow these guidelines more closely with the lack of empathy, while secondary psychopathy is more anxious and emotional and impulsive. And these are usually the criminals who react to stresses. So there is a genetic component to psychopaths and a neurobiological component that is pretty well understood, but research is still growing here. They tend to have reduced gray matter in their orbitofrontal cortex or have damaged or dysfunctional amygdalas. And here's where that distinction is between the primary and secondary psychopathies, is that the primary psychopaths are less reactive to stressors. They have an underactive behavioral inhibition system. So when they're under stress or emotional stress, they have a lack of emotional response, whereas secondary psychopaths have an overactive behavioral inhibition system. So they become more stressed, they're more susceptible to stressors, and then they react in aggressive criminal manners.
Where does psychopathy come from? The question is, what is responsible for the development of psychopathic personality features as a child grows into a young adult? Is it genetics or is it the environment? This is the nature versus nurture debate. In a twin-based study with 780 pairs done by Dr. Catherine Tubblad from the University of South California, the results showed that genetics was the primary reason for psychopathic behavior. For the younger groups, genetic components overpowered environmental factors, but as they got older, scores started to level out and the environmental factors seemed to lower psychopathic features. Psychopathy seems to be primarily genetic, but life experiences from early infancy to puberty seem to be final determinants of psychopathy. An example? Neuroscientist Dr. James Fallon had a version of the monoamine oxidase A. This is a gene that is linked with violent crime and psychopathy, also known as the warrior gene. It encodes an enzyme that affects the neurotransmitters for dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. His brain scans resemble those of a psychopath, with low activity in areas linked to empathy, morality, and self-control. Dr. Fallon is not a dangerous psychopath because his environment led him to become pro-social. It is proven that the lack of parental affection, inconsistent upbringing, or excessively strict parental practices can lead to callous and emotional traits in children.
All right, let's get this straight. You want to know about my life? Fine, but don't expect rainbows and unicorns. I came into this world in '46, but let me tell you, it was anything but normal. My real mom, she played games with me, told me she was my sister, and get this, said my grandparents were my parents. Messed up, right? As a kid, I was into some weird stuff. Knives, macabre, didn't fit in with other kids, didn't want to either. I was a loner, always on the outside. Oh, and let's not forget the fun times in the woods, tearing apart mice like it was a game, or those moments on the water when I'd try to send people to the bottom, no hint of remorse, guilt, embarrassment, or shame in sight. Yeah, I did some bad stuff in college also. I took a bunch of girls' lives, 30 I think, and they all looked like my ex. Had another lady named Elizabeth. She thought I was all warm and fuzzy, taking care of her and all. But let's be real, she started catching on to my not-so-nice side. Verbal amuse, warning signs. She figured me out eventually, got a temper, you know. So Eli got wise and went to the pops. Brought him some evidence that finally nailed me. Yeah, I tried to off her, couldn't help it when my twisted urges took over. Called her from my cozy cell to spill the beans. Guess my sickness just couldn't stay hidden. Then I finally ended up frying in the electric chair in '89. Took 'em long enough to catch on to all my messed up crap. Necrophilia, torture, obsessions. That's the deal, folks. My life ain't no fairy tale.
My turn now. Oh, and by the way, I am Edward Geen. And I came into this world in 1906 as a prisoner of my father's alcoholism and my mother's fanaticism. I was raised alongside my brother and my mother's puritanical preachings. I knew no other reality. So, during my childhood, I rarely left our farmhouse except for school. My world was confined to those bleak acres under the shadow of my mother's suffocating beliefs. When my father passed away in 1940, my brother and I were left to fend for ourselves. Then, in 44, tragedy struck again. A fire claimed my brother's life, and whispers began. Some suggested it was me who lit the fire, but between you and me, wouldn't be too surprising now, would it? Then, it is with my mother's passing in 1945 that I descended further into madness. While the world decayed around me, her room remained pristine, untouched. I started living in solitude and developed an upsetting fascination with anatomy, a morbid obsession that consumed my every waking moment. That's when the monster within me surfaced, or so they claim, and maybe they're not entirely wrong. Why, you ask? Well, two women, their faces bearing a haunting resemblance to my mother's, met their end by my own doing. But that was just the beginning. Necrophilia, the desecration of graves. My descent into madness knew no limits. In 58, they finally came for me. Society recoiled in horror at the depths of my depravity, yet my lawyer saw opportunity in insanity. And so here I remained, confined within the walls of Central State Hospital, a prison of my own making, never to face the justice of man, but forever condemned by the demons within.
The United States of America, often called the land of the free, has values emphasizing freedom and autonomy. It is a patriotic country with a strong military focus and an individualistic approach. Individualistic countries, in a very summarized way, believe that crime is a result of personal choice and must be reprimanded more harshly to reduce crime rates.
Psychopathy is likely influenced by a combination of genetic predispositions, early life experiences, family dynamics, societal factors, and individual psychological characteristics. Psychopathy has a deeply rooted relation with culture. Culture is developed over time. Social level cultural processes can shape cognition and learning, establishing gender roles, social relations, life stages, and emotional coping strategies, which affect the probability of experiencing, internalizing, and externalizing problems when faced with adversity. Adverse childhood experiences such as abuse, neglect, and trauma have a big impact on the development of psychopathic traits. Children who grow up in environments characterized by instability, violence, and parental dysfunction can be more likely to exhibit callous and antisocial behaviors. Family dynamics characterized by inconsistency, harsh discipline, and lack of warmth and support contribute to the development of psychopathy. Children who experience rejection, neglect, or abuse from their caregivers fail to develop empathy and prosocial behavior. Social and cultural influences like socioeconomic disparities, urbanization, and cultural attitudes toward violence and aggression can also contribute to the development of psychopathy. Peer influence and social interactions play an important role in shaping behavior during childhood through adolescence. The reinforcement of maladaptive behaviors and attitudes shapes how an individual perceives society.
So when we're dealing with psychopathy, it is not just about the brain. Where and how we grow up plays a huge role too. Why? Because not everyone sees mental health the same way, and that means that we have to tailor how we can help patients in a way that makes sense to them. Now, what about catching things early? Think of it as spotting a storm before it hits. Remember how we talked about Ted Bundy's early fascination with knives and the macabre? That's exactly the kind of early warning sign we're talking about. In US, spotting these signs and stepping in with the right kind of support can really turn things around. This is about knowing what protective shields like family support or community programs can help keep someone from heading down a risky path. Let's now dive into something equally important, research. This is not just about studying the problem, it's about taking a comprehensive multidisciplinary approach to find real solutions. This begins by identifying the factors that can either increase risk or offer protection. Following this is the development of interventions to put them through rigorous testing. This process is cyclical, which means that it involves constant action and reevaluation. The goal here is to prevent psychopathy from progressing and leading to violence. It's a methodical, ongoing effort to meet the specific needs of various populations with different levels of social, cultural, and ecological perspectives. For concluding our presentation, I just wanted to get back to the treatments and briefly explain a good example done at the Mendota Juvenile Treatment Center that had some positive feedbacks. In their Today Tomorrow program, they decided to use a cool approach where they only focus on the good stuff kids did and reward them for it. They really get to know each kid by considering where they came from and what they're dealing with. This way, they made sure that the treatment featured the person and not the other way around. This is a solid proof that when treatments are made to match the individual, things can really be improved. However, there is a tricky part to this. When dealing with real-world issues in places like US, we have to be careful to not wrongly label someone or make them feel stigmatized. This is all about finding a good balance between helping effectively and respecting each person's right and privacy, thus making sure that everyone gets the help they need without any negative side effects.